Just waiting for my notes to come back. Yeah. So what I'm going to cover today, first of all, what do we mean by resilience? And I've called the session Active Resilience. And that's because I think that, we're only resilient as long as we take action to support our resilience. So I think that it's a process that we have to be proactive about. It's not something that you just have. Do you have it and do you need it? So I want to give you a link to a questionnaire that you might want to do later. I'll direct you to that, Terry, whenever we come to it. And of course, talk a little about resilience in your lives, in your day-to-day lives, but of course also, as it's an employability skills session, I want to relate it to work life as well. And then I'll try and break down resilience to look at the different components that make it up. And then based on that, look at what are the sort of things that you can do to build and support your resilience. And whilst the components are pretty much the same for everyone, how you want to go about doing that will also be different for everyone. You'll all have different ways that you'll want to build and support your resilience. And it's really important to find out what works for you. So I definitely encourage you to be open to trying new things, but ultimately not everything will suit or work for everybody. So, find out what's going to work for you and maybe what works for you at different times, different stages of your life as well. And finally, I'll talk about why employers will question you on resilience and the sort of questions that they might ask around this. And of course, you'll have the opportunity to ask myself and to ask Terry questions as well. So, resilience is a word that we hear time and time again. And, sometimes whenever I hear it talked about, it kind of makes me a wee bit cross, to be honest, because it sometimes sounds like you're either resilient or you're not. You've either got resilience or you haven't. And quite frankly, that's a bit ridiculous because we're all resilient to different degrees. And at different times, we have different levels of resilience with different sort of varying levels that, are helping us to cope. So this week you might feel particularly strong and resilient, and next week you might feel a bit vulnerable and fragile, for lots and lots of different reasons. So it's very much not a case of you either, resilient or you're either resilient or you're not resilient. Okay. So on that basis, even those people who consider themselves to be very resilient have to work at it on a regular basis. They have to put in place support systems to help them to be resilient. They might not even be aware of it, but unless you have some support, some systems in place to keep your resilience there, then it doesn't last. It won't last for you. I'm sure that some of you will have heard resilience described as being able to bounce back from adversity like a rubber band. But if you think about that, do you ever come back from adversity as if things were exactly the same as before? You'll have learned things, you will have processed things that have happened, you might have changed your behaviours because of it, you might have to do things differently than before. The fact is that we don't bounce back to where we were before, but we adapt and we adjust. And so actually, I think it's far healthier to think about it in that way because we're acknowledging that actually it did have an impact on me and it might have had a significant impact. And so I've dealt with it and now things are the way that they are now, not as they were before. So rather than think of it as a rubber band, I like to think of it more like one of these slinkies because we flex and we bend and we move on. So I suppose, even just having that image of that slinky that's flexible and movable and moves on to the next place is a good sort of way to think about our own resilience. So it's not about just bouncing back to where you were before. It's about what have I learned? What has made me stronger, hopefully? What have I done differently now? What position am I in now as, for the reason of what has happened to me before? So here's a definition that I work with for resilience. The capacity to remain flexible in our thoughts, feelings, and behaviours when faced by a life disruption or extended periods of pressure, so that we emerge from difficulty stronger, wiser, and more able. And that quote is from Dr. Carol Pemberton, who happens to be someone who trained me years ago in coaching and someone whose opinion I certainly value. Um, but, look at the parts of that definition. So you've got thoughts, you've got feelings and behaviors. So if you were trying to be flexible in these, then we need to make sure that, we don't go down the route of negative thinking. Everything is always other people's fault. Negative feelings and behaviors might be where we just get angry and express that anger inappropriately, usually, take it out on other people or indeed on ourselves. Maybe not treating ourselves appropriately and positively. So, again, the capacity to remain flexible in our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. And then, when faced by a life disruption or extended periods of pressure. So, two different things there again. One is a particular situation that has had a big impact on you, a negative impact on you, and it requires your resilience to deal with it. Actually, I say negative impact on you, but some things that are very positive can also have a stressful impact on you, like something like moving house, for example. Normally, you move house because you want to, but that doesn't mean that it's not a stressful situation. So, it's not always resilience isn't always about negativity other as well. So the other is not necessarily one particular event, but a sustained level of pressure, which again requires your resilience. So two different things there, that one big thing happening or a sustained level of pressure. Sometimes that can be because of the work environment, maybe something that's happening at home that just seems to go on for a long time. So it's always going to be different things for different people. So think about it in terms of going into a work situation. We might experience disruption if, for example, something that we'd worked on, maybe worked on something for a long time, suddenly gets cancelled, or the budget is pulled, or the deadline is changed, or maybe even jobs are lost, something like that. So those might be examples of a specific life disruption. And of course, in our home, in our personal life, there could be all sorts of life disruptions as well, relationships, illness, all sorts of things. Another aspect of work is when we have extended periods of pressure. So there were some headlines last year, as I recall, from one of the banks, Goldman Sachs, about their junior staff wanting to put a cap on their working hours because they were regularly doing 18-hour shifts. And we've all been aware of the stress that NHS staff have been under, even prior to 2020, but especially since 2020. Now, to me, those examples are pretty extreme, but most jobs will have times when we're under pressure, either because you have a lot to do, perhaps there are a fewer number of staff, maybe a big contract has come in, various sort of reasons. Maybe there are time management issues. Maybe your own issues with time management could be a reason for it. Maybe it's a particularly demanding boss or customers, all sorts of reasons. And then the definition finishes with, so that we emerge from the difficulty stronger, wiser, and more able. And that's what I mean about we don't just bounce back. We emerge at the other side of some changes, having made some changes, so that when you're thinking of your examples for interview answers, think about how you have adapted, what process you have taken to do this, and what you've learned from the process. So, whenever you're going into interview and talking about resilience and maybe talking about things that you've come back from, it isn't about going back to that same place. It's what did you learn from it? What do you do differently now? How did you support yourself, perhaps? How did you maybe support team members through it? That sort of thing. And I should also say here that if you were not present at my session on change and adaptability way back in November, then this session also really links into that. And as I said to you, the recording's on the careers website under past events. So it's worth having a look at as well. So let's move on then to where do you get your resilience from? And this is a link to a free questionnaire on resilience. So Terry, if you wouldn't mind putting that into the chat for me. Don't go off to start to do that now. It'll take you far too long and you'll miss all of the session. But it's there for you to be able to do later. I'd recommend that you do the questionnaire when you have time, but the site says it can take up to half an hour to complete. So be aware of that. It certainly didn't take me that long, but I do tend to rush through them. So for me, it was probably about 10 minutes. But there are, and I'm going to tell you this up front, there are 180 questions on it. So definitely worth giving yourself a bit of time to work through it. So just to be very clear, it's not a questionnaire to tell you if you are resilient or not. Because remember, we all have certain levels of resilience, and that's not consistent all the time. So there's no point in doing something that gives you a score as such. What it does is it gives you a report which looks at 4 different aspects of resilience. And then it breaks down your responses in these 4 components to tell you what might hinder your resilience or what might boost your resilience, so that you know what is working well for you and what you might be able to do to support your resilience. So it's very personal to you. It gives you very specific aspects to look at, and you might find that it really improves your self-awareness around the topic as well. And not only might you find ways to support your resilience, but it will definitely give you some things to think about in your interview answers as well. So again, pick out what's relevant to you and what you want to be able to say to support your responses. I'm not saying that everything that's in that report that you should talk about at interview. If you prepare ahead of time, then you're talking about how you want to present yourself at interview, obviously. So I'm going to delve a wee bit deeper into what the report will cover. So even if you do the report or not, you'll still get some of the benefit of knowing about this anyway. So the 4 different components of the report, and I'm sorry, I know that's small. Hopefully on your own home screens you can see that okay, but it will be in the PDF at the end as well. But the 4 different components of the report are confidence, and that's about feelings of competence, effectiveness in coping with stressful situations, strong self-esteem, and the frequency of positive and negative emotions. So your personal report will tell you about how you are in that circumstance. Purposefulness, a clear sense of purpose, clear values, drive, and direction. The third one then, adaptability. And this is one that employers will definitely be interested in. Flexibility and adapting to changing situations which are beyond our control. And we all have those. And then the final one then, social support, is about building good relationships with others. And remember that would be, work relationships as well as personal relationships. If you're not currently working at the moment, then you might think about that in terms of people that you work with in groups and projects and clubs, that kind of thing. It's also about seeking support rather than coping on your own. And that's important because I think sometimes people feel that resilience is about being able to deal with everything on your own, but it's really not. It's about using all the resources that are available to you, getting the support that's available to you. And those 4 components are the different elements that make up resilience. And notice that a lot of them are around our thoughts and our feelings and our behaviours. So again, back to that definition again. And of course, if you don't do the online questionnaire, you can still look at these 4 aspects of resilience and just think about how you can see examples of them in your own life experiences, and think about what works well for you and maybe what hinders your resilience as well. So what's not working as well for you as you would like it to. But if you do get the questionnaire, you will get a report that, sorry, excuse me, something's just come up on my screen. Okay. So you will get a report that'll be broken down into the 4 different aspects of confidence. So confidence, purposefulness, adaptability, and social support. And it will give you a further breakdown of specific aspects of that area that either helps or hinders your resilience. And as I said, it's personal to you. So if you look at the short example that I have put up here, you can see that under confidence, one of the things that it looks at is how much you tend to worry about things. And depending on your answers, how much that helps your resilience or hinders it. And likewise, the examples I have here under purposefulness is around assertiveness. Adaptability is around level of frustration, and social support is degree of personal warmth. But again, those are just small examples from what would be a much bigger report for you. And as well as looking at the level of those aspects, it also gives you a little statement around each of those. So also great for picking out appropriate phrases when you're forming your interview responses. So it's a really good resource for that to often we find it so difficult to talk about ourselves personally. So having something that, is personal to you, but is also quite formal, and you can still choose, as I said, what you want to talk about from the report. So it's great for helping you to look at ways of building your resilience and supporting your resilience. But it's also really good for giving you a picture of how you do things and what works for you, and consider what might not be working for you as well. So what are the personal characteristics that are working for you? What are the skills that you can develop? Those sort of things. So resilient skills can help us to adapt our natural style and tendencies. Okay, so we all have our own natural style, but being more aware of things that we can do can help us to adapt that. And the second part of the report is specifically about the workplace. And I know that some of you might not be, or have that work experience or anything behind you. But when you're going for interviews, obviously it's a workplace environment that, the interviewer is thinking about. So being able to think about it in that way is quite useful in terms of how you would bring your resilience into the workplace. So the report uses a model of workplace well-being, which identifies requirements for us to feel good at work. And it's a very well-known model. So this part of the report gives you an insight into how comfortable or how challenged you are likely to feel in these 6 different circumstances at work. For example, if you look at the first one there, informed and equipped, the requirement to feel that we have the information and resources necessary to do our job. Balanced workload then, and the balance is between having enough work to do to keep you feel stimulated, but also manageable. So, not being bored, not feeling overwhelmed by it, that having that balanced workload. Collaborative relationships, people feel that they're encouraged by their work relationships and also feel supported. The fourth requirement there is about feeling in control and having some influence over how they do their work. Not always the case. And if there is change, then it is positive and it's well managed. And finally, they have a sense of purpose and feel that their goals are clear, challenging, and achievable. So, as I said, 6 different things to that model, which are the sort of things that people would look at if you wanted to put in a resilience program into a workplace. Then those are the 6 sort of things that you would be looking at in trying to support your staff and trying to help them be more resilient at work. So the report gives you a little scenario around each of those 6 aspects. And going by the responses that you put into the questionnaire, it tells you what might help you to be resilient in these situations. As you can see here, the likely positives and also possible areas for you to work on. So again, great for your own self-reflection, great for you to be able to maybe to answer interviews, but I always say prepare these sort of things so you're talking about what you want to talk about rather than what you might blurt out because you haven't prepared a question or an answer. And I think that the report is really helpful for getting you to think about the sort of experiences you've had and how you've handled them and how you might want to talk about them at interview. So, always really important to bring it all back to your own experiences that you can talk about. So, for example, in situations where information or resources are limited, where there are significant pressures on your workload or work-life balance, you may need to make more effort than usual to engage with other people, for example, so that you can share the workload where possible, so that you can ask for support where possible. So when you get questions like, how do you like to work? How do you work under pressure? Do you like to work on your own or as part of a team? Give me an example of when you've used your initiative. This is a good resource to help you to think about how you can respond to that in a strong, positive way and in a personal way as well. So I would say definitely do the questionnaire to give yourself as much information as possible. But even if you don't get a chance to do it, you can use those components of resilience and the situational aspects at work to formulate your interview responses. So, you maybe don't have your personal responses there, but you've enough information to be able to put together some answers. So, it's really important that we notice when we're low in resilience or when we begin to feel too much stress. And I'm saying too much stress because, a little bit of stress is fine. That's maybe, the adrenaline before a presentation or a few nights of late working to get an assignment finished. Maybe it might impact on your sleep, but it's not too detrimental to you. So how do you recognize when you are beginning to feel stressed and you need to be aware of maybe putting in those sort of support mechanisms? I mean, obviously, I'm trying to sort of encourage you to continually put in support mechanisms for yourself, to continually manage your stress. But think about it in terms of, when you last felt most stressed, how did you feel it in your body? Because I think the vast majority of us will know when we're stressed because of feelings that we're aware of in our body. So it might be that you have particularly tense shoulders or a sore neck. Was your stomach in knots over something? For some of us, did your skin become itchy or did you get a rash or something like that? And then, so those are sort of physical aspects of things that might be, relevant to you. All different for each of us. There's so many ways that stress can affect our body. So it's all different for each of us. It's not necessarily the same with every stressful incident as well. Maybe, for example, I talked to you at the beginning about having some particular incident that may be quite, stressful for you, where your resilience might be impacted. And then also the sort of long-term issues that might cause your resilience to be impacted. And it's entirely possible that your body will react to those things in different ways. So, being self-aware, being knowledgeable about how you particularly react to it. So that's sort of how your body reacts. Looking then at behaviors, did your behaviors change whenever you were particularly stressed? Did you, for example, snap at your friends or family more? Did you drink more alcohol or eat more? Did you head straight for the chocolate, basically? Maybe you started biting your nails. Did you find yourself thinking very negatively about things? So moving into the thoughts end of things, maybe worrying more. Finding it hard to make a decision, that can be an indicator of stress levels as well. And I'm not talking about big decisions. I'm talking about can't make a decision about anything, not even, what to have for dinner or something. Maybe to some of you that is a big decision. I don't know. Um, Did you feel that your confidence was low, or did you feel more anxious? So there are so many signs of stress in people, from behaviors to thoughts and emotions and physical symptoms. So, and it might not always be the same thing each time. You might suddenly get itchy skin that you never had before, for example. But often we experience similar signs of stress, and it's important that you know what to look for so that you can begin to address it. And obviously, the sooner that you can spot that and begin to address it, then the better. And I personally would find that my body tends to tell me when I'm stressed before my head acknowledges it. So, it's important to be able to recognize that. Recognizing your own signs of stress is always going to be very important, because then you can start to support yourself to do something about it. And I think that that's a good point to say, a good time to say that, I'm not an expert in stress or in mental health. I know, of course, I talk like I'm an expert, but, I'm not. I'm a trainer. Um, so my angle today is very much in supporting you through interview questions around resilience. So it's important to know that there is very good support in Queens for any of you that might be experience any, particular level of stress, high level of stress, or well-being issues. With the Student Wellbeing Service. So their resources are also very good. You can make contact with them through their website. So just to be able to give you that, I suppose, extra level of support there as well. So I think that one of the best things that you can do is to consider what are the things that are stressing you. And there's always something that stressing is, even if it's low level, there's always something. And to try to balance that out with the supports or the protective factors that we can put in place to help us to keep that balance there. So obviously, if there are things that are stressing you that you can do something about, then you probably should work on trying to do something about it. And that's the easiest way to manage that stressful situation. So it might be that you've been procrastinating over something and it's causing you to be stressed. Then obviously it would be a good idea to come up with a strategy and deal with the issue. So removing stressors, if you can, is useful. So, if you've got that deadline, that essay that has to be done, and you're being stressed over it, quite frankly, until you put that strategy in place, until you get that essay done and that deadline out of the way, it is going to be a stressor for you. So, you have to acknowledge that there are some things that you can do yourself to get rid of some stressors as well for yourself. But it's also worthwhile looking at those protective factors as well and trying to continually balance them up. So, how about, folks, and this might waken some of you up now, putting some into the chat. What sort of things do you like to do to either to ward off stress, or if you know that you're beginning to feel about a bit stressed, how do you address it? What are the sort of things that you might do? Pop some things into the chat there, folks. Thank you, Alex. Listen to relaxing music. I think that's probably one that quite a lot of us like to do. Push-ups. Don't do that one, Sarah. Well done. I wouldn't even have suggested push-ups for stress relief, but it's probably a good one. Anything else, anybody? Yoga, very popular one, yeah. Take a break. Terry, you like walking? Grand. Yep. Anything that isn't exercise related. Sharing with friends. Absolutely. Absolutely, that's important. Maybe controversial, but Sudoku, I don't know why it's controversial. There's Alex also saying puzzles. Don't know why that one will be controversial. Maybe it does stress people out as well. I always choose the easy one, so it's not too stressful for me. Okay, folks, thanks very much. Continue to put them in. Would be grand to hear more from you as well. Um, some of the things that you might do to fill up what I like to call your resilience reservoir or your balance, to balance out, to put in those protective factors, might be things, and it's stuff like you've talked about there, but it could be things like going for a run or a walk, maybe going to the gym, boxing, going for a swim, play with the dog. Apparently, there's a lot of benefit from, cuddling up with your dog, especially. I think cats as well. But dogs are all about unconditional love. So there's that. Read a book, listen to music. It might be relaxing music. It might be head banging music. Whatever it is that helps you. Bake a cake, chat to a friend, play an instrument, a video game, and a big one there, actually go out in nature, because that's definitely one of the ones that's promoted as well. But it is, again, about getting something or a number of things, not necessarily one thing, but a number of things. So you might go for a run, but you might also say, and afterwards, I'll chat to a friend. Or you might, go to the gym and then come back and maybe the next morning play instruments or whatever, because as I say, it is about trying to keep that balance, trying to keep yourself sustained, and you don't do that with just one act. You do that on a continual basis. So it might just be having a moment to have a quiet cup of tea. It might be taking 5 minutes to reflect on something. Nobody said meditate there, and I'm not big into it, but it certainly comes up a lot as well. And I suppose whenever I say take 5 minutes to reflect on something, that's the sort of thing I'm talking about as well. So going into a wee bit more, I suppose, detail, just to divide it up further and give you some more things to think about. What are the skills that you draw on and the supports that you have in place? Strategies that help you, words of wisdoms that give you comfort, because sometimes we have things that support us, but we don't necessarily recognize that that's what they're doing. So being aware of that sort of support network can also be useful for you as well. So a few examples there. So it might be under skills there that that you're the type of person that's able to compartmentalize work from home, for example. It might be that you can draw on your sense of humor, that you might use good time management skills. You might have friends and family or a mentor or a coach for support. You might use some of the strategies that we just mentioned, like exercising, and you might have some things that give you comfort. So it could be things like books or poems or even family sayings. So just to sort of widen that out a bit more, because I think that a lot of us, certainly just in that, the feedback coming in the chat there was about going for that exercise, which of course is very powerful as well. But there's a lot of other things there to think about as well. It might be just sitting down with a poem for 5 minutes. I know that's not going to be everybody's thing, but for some people that will work. It might be that you like to draw, for example, to do something, arts and crafts or something like that. And then it's also good to recognize that you also have skills that help you to be resilient as well. So that sort of thing, like being able to compartmentalize, being able to manage your time, being able to use your personal qualities, your sense of humor and things like that too. So it's not all about just doing the yoga. So I want to move on then to, and one of the last things I want to talk about before I go into the interview questions is about power posing. And I would expect that some of you will have come across this before because it's certainly been on the go for a while. But if you haven't, then it's based on research done by Professor Amy Cuddy, and she has one of the most watched TED Talks ever on this. The link is at the bottom of the slide, but Terry, you also have the link to put into the chat there for the folks. Thank you. And she basically said, so I would recommend that you watch the TED Talk. It's very interesting. It's about 20 minutes long or so. She basically said that our body language influences how other people think about us. We know that and behave towards us. So we all know that, but she also says that it also influences how we feel about ourselves and how we behave. And that's important. So, whenever we look at someone's body language, we automatically assess them. We don't necessarily know that we're doing it. But until she was really looking at this research, we never thought about how our body language influences our own thoughts about ourselves and also our own behaviors as well. So, it can be quite important. It's very interesting anyway. So, what she says is that if we open up our bodies and make them appear bigger in what she calls a power pose, and then we hold those power poses for 2 minutes, it increases our testosterone level, and that's our assertiveness hormone, and it decreases our cortisol, our stress hormone. So that top row of pictures are the power poses or some of the power poses, and the bottom row of pictures are the low power poses. So why should we do it? Well, what Amy Cuddy says is that when we change that balance of hormones, then we feel more powerful, more confident, assertive, happier, optimistic, creative. I mean, there's a long list of these: courageous, enthusiastic, persistent, grounded, and resilient. That's why I have it here. And we feel less anxious, stressed, and self absorbed. So, Professor Cuddy would recommend that before you go into your interview or you do your presentation or even that you sit your exam, you should power pose for 2 minutes beforehand. Now, it doesn't give you skills or talents that you don't have. It doesn't make you smarter or better informed. It doesn't change who you are. It allows you to be, as she puts it, the best version of who you are. Now, clearly you can't go into your interview and sit like any of those people in that top row, okay? You're not going to impress anyone with that. But when you're waiting to go into your interview, you can sit upright with your chest open and your head raised. And that's important. And it's important also in the interview as well. What you don't want to do is to slouch or to close your body up. Okay, so that's really important. And here is Professor Amy Cuddy. She's the one in the front, demonstrating the Wonder Woman pose. So if you nip into the toilets before your interview and you happen to see a few people all standing there like this, or standing maybe with their arms up in the air, which is another one, chances are they're doing their power posing before they get ready for their interview as well. I remember somebody at a conference when this was talked about, and she said that she went into the toilets afterwards, and there was, a row of women all standing with their arms up in the air, power posing. But it's something that the research says that, even if you do this, having that open body, having the bigger sort of posture before things like sports and stuff like that, that it also makes a difference. Now, here's the thing. I read recently that, as with most popular research, people had been trying to replicate the results from her study and couldn't do it. So I genuinely don't know how valid it is. But I think that if you purposefully do something to give you confidence, then that can only be useful. Okay, so if you do something with the intention that this is going to make me more confident, it can only be useful. Okay, anyway, we can always rely on peanuts for words of wisdom. And I love this cartoon. This is my depressed stance. When you're depressed, it makes a lot of difference how you stand. The worst thing you can do is to straighten up and hold your head high, because then you'll start to feel better. If you're going to get any joy out of being depressed, you've got to stand like this. So, very wise words, and I'm not trying to belittle depression, by the way. I hope you don't think that. I'm just trying to give you the idea that if you want to look confident, if you want to improve your resilience, then you have to also be thinking of your body and your body language and how that represents you as well. So I think those wise words are from, I think, the 1960s or so, so long before Amy Cuddy's research. So Peanuts knew at that stage that having that open body language is a positive thing. So, folks, even if the power posing does not do all the things that Amy Cuddy says it does, it will certainly make you look more confident and hopefully make you feel good too. All right, now might be a good time for any questions if you want them, folks, before I move on to the interview end of things. Nothing's come into the chat, no questions, Terry, at this point, no?
Nope, nothing at all just yet.
Okay, folks. Well, if you have anything, you can put it in, but I'll certainly move into the interview end of things. And if you've been with me before, you know that I always start with reminding you about the STAR technique for answering your interview questions, for preparing your interview questions as well. Um, Basically, you want to be able to tell the interviewer your story by putting your answer into context for them. We always have to think about that interviewers have probably been listening to 10, 20 people when they come for interview. They're all asked the same questions. Often they'll hear a lot of very similar answers coming back as well. So, what you're trying to do is make things as clear and logical for them as you can, by putting it into that sort of nice story formula for them. So, when you're formulating an answer to your interviews, try and follow the STAR technique. It helps to make your answers clear and logical, and it means that you're getting across the main points, the ones that you really don't want to miss out on. So start obviously by listening to the question. Think of the example that you're going to use. Hopefully, you'll have already prepared your answers or something similar to it ahead of time. But even, use this if you have to think on your feet as well. So frame your answer into situation, task, action, and result. Describe the event or situation that you were in. Explain the task that you had to complete. What were the challenges? Um, Describe the specific actions that you personally took to complete the task. You can certainly talk about team actions, but also talk about what you individually did. And finish with the results. What was the results of your actions? Were there benefits? Were there savings? What was the impact? So in terms of, I suppose, what employers want um, around resilience, they want people who can deal with pressure at work and stay strong in the face of difficult situations. Around sort of keeping calm, being focused and poised, and if you can be able to sort of use your experience from the past to give employers the enough information to be able to say, well, actually, I can deal with things in quite a calm way, or I can manage things under pressure, then that's always going to be a positive for you. It's important that you can demonstrate your sort of strength of character at work and your composure in the face of adversity. You're not going over the top about this or anything, but you're looking at what experiences you have that you can talk about there. And before you answer, think about what resilience would mean for your potential employer. Resilience is important in many roles. Think of good examples which would demonstrate how you applied that sort of quality. And the best answers are going to tell that story to show your resilience in a positive light. But it's also about that process that we go through to make us resilient. So you might also talk about, how you've learned, how you've been able to extend what you learned from probably a mistake. Often we don't like to talk about mistakes or about things that have gone wrong. But if you have some good examples where you can show that, yes, this went wrong. And by the way, of course, that sort of thing happens to all of us. So we've all got examples of things that either we did wrong or mistakes that were made or whatever. But being then able to talk about how you process that, how you learned from it, how you've moved on is really one of the things that you want to be able to do in terms of resilience. Just to remind you folks about the other software package that we have available to you in terms of being able to practice interviews as well. So that one's called Shortlist Me. And that's the link there. But Terry has also got a link that he can put into the chat for you and a PDF just about it as well. And it's basically, an online platform that you choose which interview you would like to do. You've got 3 days then to actually complete the interview. There's about 5 or 6 questions in each one, and you get feedback from it. And because it's just a software package, you're not dealing with real life people. So, there's nothing that you need to worry about. But we are finding that, quite a number of students sign up to it, register for it, but don't actually do the interviews. So sign up whenever you know that you've got, a few hours to be able to do it and learn from it, basically, be able to, because a lot of interviews, even now, whenever we're going back to sort of real life things, a lot of interviews are still being online. So it's a good way to be able to practice that sort of style as well. So moving on to questions then at the interview, I'll just give you that sort of list of possible questions that you might get around resilience. And some of these questions are the ones that you want to have prepared for, because as I said to you, especially whenever it's personal questions, you don't want to blurt out the first embarrassing thing that comes to you. So having things prepared will stop you from doing that. So describe a situation where things deteriorated quickly. How did you react to recover from that situation? Again, resilience wasn't actually mentioned there. It's about, that it's around that topic. Tell us about a project where you achieved success despite the odds being stacked against you. Give us an example of a situation where you worked under pressure. Under what conditions do you work best and worst? Which recent project or situation has caused you the most stress? How did you deal with it? And again, we don't like to admit that things caused us stress or maybe things went wrong. But, interviewers will know that it has happened to you in the past. Now it's up to you to be able to provide a good answer, a good response to that sort of thing. And a good example of a question that you might like to have an answer prepared for, just so that you don't blurt out the first embarrassing thing that comes to you. When is the last time that you were upset with yourself? And that might not be within a work situation. And as I say, it's always the very personal things that spring to mind, and you don't necessarily want to do that at interview. So have that sort of thing prepared. If I hadn't prepared an answer for something like that question, I could come out with absolutely anything that was kind of, at the forefront of my head, and things that I really don't want to tell an employer. What makes you frustrated or impatient at work? That's quite a good one, actually. So remember, put your answer into that STAR framework. Position your response in a positive way. So even if things turned out badly, what was the positives from it? So even if the change, for example, was not entirely successful, or if it was uncomfortable for you, what were the positives from it? All right, folks, so I'm almost finished there. I'm just going to give you some reminders of some sessions that are still coming up. As I said, previous sessions are on the website under past events, and give you the opportunity to ask any questions that you might want to. And I'm also just going to stop the recording so that you might want to have a better chance of asking questions. Any questions? All happy with everything? I'm assuming there's nothing coming in from anybody.
a few people typing, but
All
seems
right.
to be dried up. There's
Okay.
somebody typing now, actually. Just said thank you.
You're very welcome. Can't seem to find the recording thing here. You're very welcome. Doesn't seem like there's any questions.
Nope, I think it was all very clear and concise, Roisin.
Yeah, that's good. And it's lunchtime, so that's also
Do you want your feedback questionnaire popped in?
yeah, please, actually. And the PDF as well, please, Terry.
One of them wouldn't upload,
All right.
so it wouldn't let me.
Which one was that?
The student experience.
Oh, the shortlister one. So
Yeah.
the slides are available okay, yeah?
Try and put
Okay.
them on now.
I think that's the important bit.
Nope, it's not allowing me either.